Good evening and welcome to Act One, a Canadian take on news events. I'm your host, Gordy Canuck, real name Gordon Causey. Beard's getting a little mangy, time to trim it down, but didn't do it today. Maybe fix the backdrop a bit. Today is Wednesday. It is the 10th of December, 2025, and we are bang on 10 p.m. I started right on time tonight. And as I wrote in the message on the live chat, anyone coming on wanting to remind me to switch the live chat. The YouTube has a utility where you can have top chat or live chat. I always like to be on live chat, but it defaults to top chat. I have already made that switch. Danny has shown up, wishing me a good evening, praying hands, the cross, and the coffee. And this is kind of an answer to the subject of this video that I'm having. And in the thumbnail, I'm asking the question, is Islam peace? And I'm going to dive into that. Love what Danny writes. He writes this on pretty much, I think, on every live stream. He will be writing, Jesus is Lord and King. And anyone stumbling upon this channel for the first time, yes, I am a professing Christian, recognizing that I'm fallen, I'm broken, I'm sinful. I am not the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. But before I get rolling into things, as always, you're welcome to hit like, to share, to subscribe to the channel. If you like this kind of content, I always say this, it's very raw, very basic, very dressed down, not a lot of production value. And I do know that some people appreciate that kind of content, like all the fancy bells and whistles. They don't like the AI generated content. I do not engage with AI. Well, I shouldn't say I do not engage with it at all, because it has become so pervasive in today's world that you can't help but interact with it some. But I do my best to interact with it as little as possible. But I do know that whenever I do a Google now, as Canadians sometimes say, when I do a Goog, what I'm getting is an AI generated response, because Google's AI tool Gemini is pretty much 9 times out of 10. That's where you're getting the answer from. At any rate, let's dive in. Is Islam peace? What's happened is I do not go on to Twitter very often. Uh, Typically, what I do is when I'm about to do a video, when I set it up, I go and I share a link on Twitter and on Facebook, sometimes on Reddit. And so that's when I'll look and see what is on Twitter. And on occasion, I'll go and just check, or if I've responded to a tweet and I want to see if someone has engaged back with me, I will go and take a look at Twitter. And I don't know if my Twitter feed is representative of what other people see, or if it's unique to me. But what I am seeing currently on Twitter, I consider it something of ground zero for what I think are referred to as the culture wars. There is a war going on for the culture, for the hearts and minds of people, of the general population, and they're really pushing a narrative, I find, on Twitter. And one of the things I'm seeing is a big promotion of Islam, and one of the religious faith known as Islam. Others will talk about being a member of the Muslim faith. My understanding is the religion is called Islam, and adherents to that faith are called Muslims. And as is the case with Christianity, there isn't a universal Islamic belief. There's Sunni, there's Shia, I think there's Wahhabi. There are sects within, there are divisions within Islam. I don't think it's as divided as Christianity is, though. However, it should be noted that Islam as a religion came around some 500 years or so after the establishment of the Christian faith. So It hasn't had as much time, but it is an incredibly fast growing faith. It is considered the second largest faith in the world next to Christianity, but it's coming up hard and fast. And when they identify the number of Christians in the world, they're including Roman Catholic, they're including all the Protestant denominations, they would be including Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and everything under this broad umbrella that is Christianity. And what's interesting is that some Christians will say, well, though the Mormons aren't included or the Jehovah's Witnesses aren't included. But in terms of the broad umbrella, how many people are in the Christian faith, given that it's the world's number one religion, you have to combine all of them in order to surpass Islam. Islam is in and around 2 billion people on planet Earth. And so we're talking about 1 in 4 because we're 8 billion. Now, let me read what Danny's writing. Danny is writing that speaking of Islam and probably Muhammad, Matthew 24:11. Actually, I have my Bible here and I have a couple spots bookmarked, and that's one of them. Many false prophets shall rise and shall deceive many. And again, he's got Matthew 7:15. Actually, I start at the beginning of 7 with my quote, but I was also going to be talking about this. And Danny's quoting Matthew 7:15, beware of false prophets, which come in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they're ravenous or ravening wolves. Um, and then Danny goes on to say that Islam is not compatible with any Western country. Before I get rolling on this, though, I am going to take a page out of scripture, and it's in chapter 7 of Matthew, right at the beginning, right at the beginning of Matthew. And it says, chapter 7, verse 1, judge not that you be not judged, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. As you judge others, so shall ye be judged. And the measure you give will be the measure you get. And then this is the verse I really wanted to highlight on was verse 3. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, then when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First, take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Do we have a log in our eye, especially when we're confronting Islamic proselytizing, uh, Islamic evangelism? And in my experience, going all the way back to the 80s, 90s, working in downtown Toronto, I saw what I will describe as Islamic evangelists, individuals working the street corners, handing out copies, English translations of the Quran, trying to win converts to the Islamic faith. It's been going on a long time. And which is something Christians do as well, obviously. Um, and Now I'll read it. Danny wrote Islam as an acronym. People will say that Bible stands for basic instructions before leaving Earth. And Danny has Islam as an acronym, and it's I speak lies and malfeasance. And Danny then goes on to say that he's trying to remove his own 2x4, a log in the eye, a 2x4. What is the log in the eyes of Christians? When we talk about this concept of that I see being promoted heavily on Twitter, I'm seeing Islam is peace, Islam is peace. I'm seeing ubiquitous tweets proclaiming that Islam is peace. And I can see how people would be attracted to that message in a world that's filled with so much hate, so much violence, so much discord that, oh, Islam is peace, Islam is peace. And when I see messages like this repeating over and over and over again, it strikes me as a form of propaganda because the population has such a short, narrow attention span. And one way to punch through it is to repeat the same message over and over and over again until it becomes something of the default position. And we saw this with the COVID era and the vaccines and the messaging of safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective. There's a reason why that branding statement, that marketing campaign, that propaganda was so pervasive. They were trying to embed that messaging into the subconscious mind of the population, safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, so that it would be the default position. A lot of people don't know a lot about Islam, but if they are keep continually confronted with the message that Islam is peace, Islam is peace, Islam is peace, it can become the default position for some. But yet it seems to fly in the face of so much what we see in the world in Islamic countries, countries like Yemen, where hundreds of thousands of people were killed in a 10-year long civil war, or in Syria, or in Sudan now. And we look at what's happening in Nigeria. We look at what's happening in so many Islamic countries, and certainly in countries like Iran that are considered Islamic theocracies. That is to say that there's no separate in a country like Iran. There is little to no separation between religion and the state. The state and the religion are pretty much married together. But again, getting back to the log in the eyes of Christians, can we say that Christianity is peace when over so much of our Christian history we have seen the Christian faith used as justification for war? Onward Christian soldiers marching as to war. Well, not always as to war, marching to war. Look at the Crusades. The Crusades, the European Crusaders, 1100, 1200, I forget exactly what year, but it's 1,000-ish years ago, when under the banner of the cross, individuals went marauding into the Middle East to rescue, to bring the Holy Land under Christian European control. If we look at the history of the Roman Catholic Church and the manner in which they went about conversion, if someone wouldn't convert, they would be burned at the stake. We can look at the Spanish Inquisition and the Inquisition in places like Portugal, where individuals who would not submit to Rome's authority and they claim to have God's authority, then you would be killed. You would be burned at the stake. You would be boiled in oil. You would be torn apart by animals. I mean, Rome is incredible when we look at the history, how initially Rome was a pagan empire, and anyone who did not renounce their Christian faith was liable to be executed. And then when they eventually, after Constantine and then after Julian in particular, became officially a Christian empire, at least in name, they engaged in the same type of behavior. Only now, instead of telling people to renounce the Christian faith, they had to affirm the Christian faith or they'd be killed. And so that is the log in the eye of Christians, in my mind, is we've got to know our own history and our own. We look at Saudi Arabia, where they engage their Sharia law, where women cannot drive. We look at human rights in a place like that, in a place like Saudi Arabia, where people, if you're caught in adultery, there can be the various crimes are dealt with incredibly harshly, public lashings, public executions, beheadings. It's brutal, but the same things used to happen in the Christian world. In the Christian world, if someone was, in Middle Age times, in the Middle Ages, if they were caught stealing, they would lose a hand. If they were caught, perjury, if they were caught bearing false witness, they could lose their tongue. And there's a passage in the Bible, I believe it's included in and around the Sermon on the Mount. I don't know if it's actually part of the Sermon on the Mount, but Jesus talks about how, if your right hand causes you to sin, better to cast it off than to, better to lose a member, part of your body, than to be cast into hell. Get rid of it. And that was the justification used in periods like the Middle Ages for amputations of. So we do not, Christians, we do not have a great history. Christ does. Jesus Christ never engaged in the type of activities that people have engaged in Jesus's name. That I would argue that they profaned Jesus's name by saying what they were doing was in the name of Christ when it was not. Most will know the passage in John where the woman caught in adultery is brought before Christ. And the law, the Pharisees and the religious leaders of the day, they confront Jesus and say, we caught this woman in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says that she is to be stoned to death. She is to be killed. What do you say? And Jesus then says, let he who is amongst you who has no sin, let you who is sinless cast the first stone. And starting with the oldest and on down to the youngest, they all one by one leave until there is only Jesus and the woman. And Jesus asks her, is there no one left here to condemn you? And she says, no, sir, not one. And then Jesus says, then I do not condemn you either. Go out and sin no more. Jesus shows mercy, compassion, grace. Christians often throughout our long history, 2000-ish years, have not shown mercy, compassion, or grace. And that's where this passage at the beginning of chapter 7, words spoken directly by Jesus himself, judge not that you not be judged, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. So the manner in which you judge others, that's the same way. If you're unforgiving, unmerciful, ungraceful, do not expect mercy and grace to come back at you. It's a bit of a play on that old line, what goes around comes around. What you bring out, what you put forward comes back to you. Let me catch up. Danny's filling the live chat. Uh, now, I'm going to contrast Jesus with Muhammad. I'm going to leave aside the labels Christianity and Islam. Let's just look at Jesus and let's look at Muhammad. Jesus was an itinerant Jewish rabbi teacher, not a warlord, which is what Muhammad was. Muhammad was a warlord with a small following to start. And then when he started to claim divine revelation and the status of a prophet, his following grew. And I would argue that Muhammad borrowed heavily from both Christianity and Judaism. He was living on the Arabian Peninsula, 5th, 6th century, whatever it was, about 500 years after Christ, 600 years after Christ. And on the Arabian Peninsula, there were a lot of Jews, there were a lot of Christians. So he was familiar with their religious beliefs and practices, and he adopted them. The Jews practice circumcision on the 8th day. A Jewish boy will be circumcised. That's when Jews circumcise their children. Muslims, though, because of Ishmael, they circumcise, I believe it's the age of 13. So a Muslim will say to a Jew, what's the big deal? You get circumcised when you're 8. You don't even remember, right? 8 days. You don't even remember it. You're an infant. Every Muslim remembers his circumcision being done at 13 because they follow the example of Ishmael. Abraham had 2 children. uh, by Hagar, his wife's slave, servant, maid. He had Ishmael because Sarai, was old. She was probably 80, 90 years of age, long past the age of giving birth to children. And when Abram received the promise that he would be the father of a great nation, she said, "How am I going to have a kid? Here, go sleep with my maidservant, Hagar. She'll have a child for on my behalf." And she did. She had a child by the name of Ishmael, and he was circumcised at the age of 13. And since Muslims derived their lineage through Ishmael, they're Ishmaelites. There you go. So 13. The Jews in antiquity and still today would pray 3 times a day. They would bow in the direction of Jerusalem 3 times a day. They would bow their heads and pray to Lord God, creator of all things. Well, Islam, same thing, only, well, we do it 5. You do it 3, we do it 5. You bow your head, we have a prayer mat, and we stick our head right to the ground. We go further than you do. We're better than you are, at least in terms of Judaism. In terms of the relationship between Islam and Jesus, I find it paradoxical, and I also find it contradictory, because Islam proclaims Jesus to be a prophet. They will say, "Blessed be his name." When they say Muhammad, they say, "Blessed be his name." Jesus, blessed be his name. And they'll quite often say it in Arabic. And I don't speak Arabic. The only thing I know is Salah alaikum, which is basically saying, as I understand it, the peace of God be with you, peace and grace of God, or whatever, something like that. Salah alaikum. And I have no problem with that expression. People will ask, and I've seen this written as well on Twitter. I saw a tweet shared pervasively where it says, "Allah is the God of Moses, the God of Noah, the God of Jesus, the God of Abraham, the God of." Not once, though, did it mention Muhammad. It said, but that Allah is the God of all the Old Testament patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, right through to Jesus in the New Testament. Didn't say Muhammad. And that is something I don't really have an issue with, to the extent that Allah, the word Allah, is an Arabic word, and it means, its translation in English is God. It's not a special name. It's the Arabic word for God is Allah. The Spanish have a word for God. It is Dios. For the French have a word for God. It is Dieu. Germans, Gott. Now, would we say that the French don't believe in the same God as the English because they worship someone they call Dieu? No, we recognize that Dieu is simply the French word for God. Likewise, Allah is the Arabic word for God. But where I find there to be a contradiction is that Islam acknowledges Jesus as a prophet on the one hand, but on the other hand, they deny the resurrection. They believe that they contend that Jesus died on the cross and that there was no resurrection. Well, then, if that is true, if Islam is true in saying that Jesus died on the cross and never resurrected, well, then that denies Jesus as being a prophet, because Jesus prophesied that he would be crucified, that he would die, that he would be buried, and that on the third day he would rise again. One iteration of that is when the Pharisees and religious leaders, they came and they said, "Show us a sign. Come on, do a miracle. Show us a sign." And Jesus said, "A wicked, evil, and adulterous generation seeks a sign, but no sign shall be given to them except for the sign of Jonah. For just as Jonah was within the belly of the whale or great fish for 3 days, so too the Son of Man will be 3 days buried in the earth, and on the third day he shall rise. Son of Man shall be crucified, he shall die, and he shall rise and be resurrected. That what Jesus made that prophecy on numerous occasions when he came down from the mountain. After praying, he was confronted by a man whose son was suffering from what one account has it as demonic possession. I think demonic, that's in Matthew, and Luke, it's just, or rather, Luke describes it as demonic possession. Matthew describes it as epilepsy. Regardless, you have a young man in distress. The father says, I asked your disciples to heal my son, but they could not. Can you do it? And Jesus says something to the effect of, you faithless generation, how much longer must I endure with you? Bring the child to me. He heals him. Miraculous healing. The crowd is amazed. They're like, who is this man that he can do such things? And then Jesus proclaims his forthcoming death and resurrection. The Son of Man shall be delivered up. He'll be crucified, he'll die, and on the third day he will rise again. So, how can Muslims proclaim Jesus to be a prophet and yet deny Jesus's prophecy? It's a contradiction. It's beyond being a paradox. There's not tension here. There's not competing. How do you know? How are we to test whether a prophet is genuinely a prophet or not? And the Bible informs us that we are to, if the prophecy comes true, then you know that you're dealing with a true prophet. If the prophecy does not get fulfilled, then you're dealing with a false prophet. So Islam, in this respect, when it comes to their proclamation of Jesus as a prophet, they're sucking and blowing at the same time. They're denying Jesus as a prophet while proclaiming him as a prophet, and you can't have it both ways. Now, just going to read what's being written by Danny. He wrote that Islam is not a religion of peace, it is a religion of absolute and total control. Also, it is not a religion. Total misconception, according to Danny. He's writing that it is an ideology. The one thing, the word Islam has two connotations to it. The most literal connotation is peace, submission, to submit. And in terms of religious belief, whether you be Jewish, whether you be Islamic, whether you be Christian or other faiths, there is an element of submission to it. We are to submit to God. So an element of submission is somewhat pervasive amongst all of them. And when you look at Islam, salam, the word just simply is salam, not Islam, but salam, of which Islam is a part. Salam, salam alaikum. Salam does mean peace in Arabic. So the two things you will hear about those promoting, selling, propagandizing for the Islamic faith is they'll say Islam is peace. It's built into the name of our religion. But just because it's built into the name, there's later on in that chapter 7, and I believe Danny alluded to it earlier. If you go to chapter 7 and starting in verse 15, where Jesus further says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. This is an important passage. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns or figs from thistles? So every sound tree bears good fruit. A sound tree cannot bear evil fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down, and it is thrown into the fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits. What are the fruits of the Islamic world? I would ask anyone watching this who's living in Canada, the United States, Western Europe, whether or not would you want to live in Saudi Arabia? Would you want to live in Iran? Would you want to live in Pakistan? Would you want to live in Indonesia? Would you want to live in a Muslim majority country, especially those that follow closely Sharia, or what is sometimes referred to as Islamic law or Sharia law? Would you want to live in that type of society? I cannot believe that there would be a woman with Western values who would want to live in any one of those aforementioned countries. Maybe I'm wrong, but I doubt it. I don't think any Western individual would want to be living in those countries. We look at the tolerance that we have in the Western world for sexual sin. Uh, and this is one area where those of the Islamic faith and the Christian faith sometimes do come together, is our recognition of sexual sin. Both faiths, both Islam and Christianity, biblically based Christianity, acknowledge that any sexual relations outside of a consecrated marriage between a man and a woman is sinful. And that's one area where we can find, at least in that area, I believe, a degree of common ground. But what happens in the Islamic world to someone caught in a homosexual relationship? In the Christian world, you're not going to see an individual thrown from a building. And if that were to happen, and I'm not saying there's never been violence against homosexuals, but the perpetrators of that act will be brought to justice if they're caught. You know, the God of the Christian faith said, "Let he who's without sin cast the first stone." Whereas in Islamic countries, good luck, good luck. And so when I look at the fruit, it's the Western world, we are not perfect. We are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. However, degrees of evil, degrees of bad, degrees of, quality of life. And the Western world, we can be better by following more closely and aligning our societies more closely with biblical teaching. We'll never get there all the way. It'll never be perfect, not on this side of the veil. But things are far better here than they are anywhere in what I will call the Islamic world. Uh, so I dealt with that. I wanted to talk about that, the fact that Islam, yeah, within the name, submission, salam, peace, but by their fruits you shall know them. Is it a peaceful religion? On October 7th, which is a contentious issue, but the leaders of Hamas, an Islamic group, said this is just the beginning. We're just getting started. We're wiping them all out. We're going to kill them all. We're going to kill them all and drive them all out from the river to the sea. This is only the beginning. Come on, everyone join what they called the Al-Aqsa flood. We're flooding in. And I'm telling you, I'm firmer and firmer in my belief and contention that in order for a peaceful resolution to the conflict between Muslims and Jews, between Israelites and Hamas and Hezbollah and all these groups, they need Christ. They need the Prince of Peace. And until that, there is going to be discord, war, conflict, violence. They do not believe in he who said, let he who has cast, or let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Jesus said, you have heard it said, take an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Both Islam and Judaism, the three religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, we are what are called the Abrahamic faiths. We all have a root, common denominator in Abraham. So they're called the Abrahamic faiths. And Jews and Muslims likewise preach an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth and a life for a life. Whereas Jesus came and he said, "You have heard it said, take an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, take not an eye for an eye, nor a tooth for a tooth. Yet to everyone who takes of you, give more. If someone asks you to go a mile, go 3. If someone strikes you on one cheek, give them the other one. Let him hit you on the other one as well." Is that the message of the religion that promotes itself as being peace? Absolutely not. It's also, but to a degree, we can argue that they're being true. They believe in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth and a life for a life, as does Judaism. You killed me, I'm going to kill you back more. That's the ideology on both sides of that conflict. Christianity, we're in between them. Judaism came first, prophesizing, the Jews were the people who were the keepers of the covenant promises of God and the prophets that told us that a Messiah was coming, the suffering servant who would bear the iniquities of us all, who would go like a sheep to the slaughter, mute, quiet. And that prophecy was fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. And then 500 or so years after Christ, we had this guy, Muhammad, an illiterate warlord seeking power, who comes up with a new religion, claims that he is, though members of the Islamic faith will proclaim that theirs is the final prophet, that Muhammad has superseded Jesus. No, Muhammad did not supersede Jesus. Muhammad is a false prophet. If you, from my Christian perspective, and again, you can't, I love this expression, sucking and blowing at the same time. Members of the Islamic faith contend that Jesus was a prophet, yet they deny his prophecy. Well, you can't have it both ways. If Jesus was a prophet, then you have to accept his death and resurrection because he prophesied it. If you deny his death and resurrection, then you are denying that he is a prophet. So stop it. Stop sucking and blowing. But the thing is, how many people are going to have gone deeply into Scripture, have gone deeply into the Quran, have gone deeply into the Old Testament books? Not many. Not many. A lot of people in this world are just seeking peace. They just want peace. They don't want justice. They just want peace. It's a famous line of my dad's. He used to say, when I was younger, I wanted justice. Now that I'm getting old, all I want is peace. I just want peace and quiet, tranquility, whatever it takes to calm the waters. So it's not fair. I don't care. Whatever it takes to bring peace, to bring quiet, to bring tranquility was all my dad was interested in. I still believe in my heart of hearts that he was interested in justice, but he was a funny guy. Anyway, I'm just going to read on what Danny was saying. That was my message for tonight. I mean, I'm noticing this on Twitter, the culture wars, and I'm seeing it manifest in other areas as well. One is with the gender confused community, and I'm seeing a number of individuals tweeting and retweeting a message that says trans women are women, trans women are women. They write it 7, 8, 9, 10, a dozen times, as if you repeat it enough, it will embed itself into the adult subconscious mind of the low IQ Western world, and we will accept that a man can be a woman, which is horse hockey. It's garbage. It's nonsense. Even if a guy does the full Monty transition with, removing his waterworks and does the full Monty, even then, all he is a surgically altered male, he doesn't become a woman. And this is one of the reasons why my station, I think, and this is just an opinion on my part, but I do not think my station gets the exposure it might get. I think I could get a lot more exposure if I did not go counter narrative. If I said, embrace AI, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Everyone's got to use it. You're not going to be able to survive in the world with AI without AI. So fully engage with it, embrace it, learn how to use it. That is the message that Google and the Meta and the tech giants, that's the message they want promoted. They want the message that, hey, do as you feel. If you're a guy and you're gender confused, pronounce yourself to be a female, and the entire world will have to acknowledge your delusional reality. And if I wanted to, if my ultimate goal with my little miserable station was to, as much exposure as possible, I would engage with AI. I'd start promoting that I'd promote that, you know, gender is just a societal construct and it's got nothing to do, everything is based on inner feelings. If I want, but I don't do that. I don't do that. I'm going to be true to myself, regardless, and true to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and true to biblical teaching. God created the male and female. God didn't just create everyone as an androgynous blob that gets to decide its own gender. Not the way we were created. I'm 6 foot tall. I'm 5 foot 11 and a quarter, maybe. I don't know. I'm somewhere around 5'11 and a quarter. When I was younger, I made it all the way to 5 foot 11 and 3/4. I was 1/4 shy of that magical 6 feet height. And um, now I've shrunk. As you get older, the discs in your back compress. I've heard them described as jelly donuts. So you get this compression going on. And as you age, you lose a bit of height. Not a lot, but some. So I'm down to 5 foot 11 ish. Woohoo. But can I pronounce, can I proclaim, can I identify as someone who's 6 foot 7? Sure. I just, that was intentional, by the way. I don't fully understand it, but I do know that the numbers 6 and 7, I don't understand what the younger people, my 12-year-old, who I intimated yesterday would be on the live stream that we were going to discuss The Chosen. I decided against it. I decided against having him on the channel. I think he's too young. You know, call it sober second thought. When I reflected on it, I said, I don't think so. I don't think that's a good idea to have him on the channel. So I apologize for announcing that I'd have him on. He did make a brief cameo once. He came and handed me Max, our 4-month-old puppy, 4.5 months old, I guess. Max, the wonder dog, our new puppy, was born August 3rd. So 4 months and a week old. And you saw the big guy, he handed Max over to me. But anyway, I want to read up on what's being written. Pardon the coughing. Danny says that if I choose to leave Christianity, I will not be killed for it. Unlike a Muslim who leaves Islam. Look at what happened, Charlie Hebdo, a magazine I think in Paris. I know it was in France. And they published some cartoons that mocked or ridiculed Muhammad and Islam, and it resulted in acts of violence, murder. Look at Salman Rushdie, the author of a book called The Satanic Verses. He was stabbed in the eye and nearly killed. We have these fatwas, these religious edicts put out by people like the Ayatollahs in Iran, when they basically pronounce a death sentence in the name of Allah, in the name of God, in the name of Muhammad. But then again, Muhammad was a warlord. Jesus was not a warlord. Jesus, you've never heard Muhammad called the Prince of Peace. I've never heard it. Let me read on. Um, Danny's writing that funny how Muslims leave Islamic countries, yet don't want to go to another Islamic country. They want to get the hell out for good reason. Also to subject us to their BS. There is a belief within Islamic teaching that at some point the entire world will be Islamic. And they also believe that once Islamic, always Islamic. And it should be noted Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, was at one time under the rule. It was a part of the what was referred to as the Arabian Caliphate, much of northern Africa. Their world empire was very large. And as a matter of fact, Arabic had some influences on the Spanish language. It's where you get the L from El Paso, El this, El that, El Dorado. The L in front of those words is Arabic in origin. So it's going to be a challenging world because Islam is on the move and it is a religion that is growing because in much of the Islamic world, birth rates are significantly higher than what they are in the Western developed world. In the Western developed world, our birth rates will not even maintain the current population. The only way that a country like Canada grows is through immigration. Natural population growth is non-existent. If it wasn't for immigration, our population would be going down. There are two. It's expressed two different ways. There's birth rate, fertility rate, and in terms of fertility rate, every woman during her childbearing years needs to, on average, have 2.1 children. And provided that is the case, if the fertility rate is 2.1, a population will maintain itself. If it's lower than that, however, then the population is going to decline. I think Canada's fertility rate is down in the neighborhood of 1.4, nowhere near what is needed just to maintain the population. Forget grow. We cannot grow without immigration. But that's not the case in the Islamic world, in Pakistan, in Indonesia, in the Middle East, in places like Somalia or Sudan that have large Islamic populations. And goodness help you if you're a Christian living in Nigeria with the Islamic groups in that country. You're going to, in all likelihood, and this one thing kind of going off topic a bit, but Christians in North America, certainly, a lot of Americans you'll hear, and Canadians too, saying that we are not appointed to wrath. Because I'm a Christian, I'm not appointed to wrath. Tell that to the Christians in Nigeria who are being murdered for their faith. Tell that throughout the history of the Christian faith, Christians have been murdered for their faith, starting with Rome, the Romans throwing them to the lions and other acts of violence. Let's see what Danny is further writing. Sharunian's here. I've got too many messages are got to catch up. All right, Denny writes, Islam has no place in Europe, Canada, or the USA. Just look at what they've done so far this year to Christmas markets that happened in Germany last Christmas, where individuals coming from the Middle East, from Islamic countries, have driven helter-skelter into large shopping areas during the Christmas season. And Nancy believes that the Pope, she's writing that the Pope is the greatest evil that ever happened to Christianity. And Kenny's saying to heck with Sharia law. And then Nancy's writing that Islam started as a small movement, then some caliphate king decapitated Muhammad's grandson, put his head on a spike, then molded the religion, commissioned heresy from the prophet and the hadiths. commissioned not heresy, but hearsay. What happened is, my understanding is that Muhammad was illiterate, that people came to him with religious questions, that he would go and say, I'll come back to me after I consult, with Gabriel or an angel. And then he would come back and he would make a pronouncement. These pronouncements would be written down, and these pronouncements that Muhammad was making, professing them to be divinely inspired, were shared around. And then a caliphate, a religious leader, then collected them all together, collected became a rule. If you've got one of the what Muhammad taught, you have to bring it here. And he brought it, and then it was codified, and they had a one book, the Quran, and anything that caliphate didn't like was done away with. And that's one of the excuses that Muslims will use. They'll say that the Bible has been corrupted. I'm reading, this is the English Standard Revised Version. Um, I've read on here before. I don't have it here with me right now, but the Good News translation, and there's the New Living translation, then there's the New International Version, then there's King James. I don't know how many translations there are. There are a lot. There's over a dozen different translations of the Bible. And Muslims will say that that speaks to corruption of the text, but it doesn't. All it is when you take a word that was originally spoken in Aramaic, was then written down in Greek, and then gets translated in English. Anyone who speaks more than one language knows that translation isn't cut and dried, that sometimes words can have more than one translation. I entered the room and it was very welcoming. Uh, and another person might say, I entered the room and I got a warm reception. Welcoming, warm reception. Does one contradict the other? No. But because the Quran, because this caliphate, this religious leader, brought all the writings in together and then chose the ones he liked and destroyed the rest. And they're all written in Arabic. So, and I do know that Muslims are encouraged. There are English translations of the Quran, but Muslims are encouraged to say the words in the original Arabic, because it's almost like they think that is God's language, that God speaks Arabic. And I always harken back, and I know I sound like a bit of a one-string banjo. I keep repeating the same story over and over again, but I really like the story of Moses standing before the burning bush when he asked God for his name. When I go to your people, to the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I say to them, the God of your forefathers sent me, they're going to want a name. What is the name? What name shall I give them? And the answer he's given is, I am. Tell them, I am sent you. I am that I am. I exist. Uh, I think, it doesn't matter. All human language has its limitations. English, Greek, Aramaic, Arabic, all of them. Anyway, uh, and the hadiths, is from what I understand, getting back to Nancy's comment, the hadiths are kind of like religious commentary. Jews would have the Talmud, which is kind of a discussion, an argument, a debate going over centuries, with rabbis arguing over, ethical and religious teaching. It's not scripture. And the Hadith, I think, is similar in scope. And Christians, we have, likewise, we have commentary written by, I'm trying to remember some of the names of the, you know, second, third, fourth century, Thomas Aquinas and these individuals, bishops and such, writing their epistles, their letters, their views. Uh, anyway, Danny's wishing Nancy a good evening. And Nancy's writing something interesting. She's writing it to Danny. And she's saying that as soon as a higher authority was created, and she's saying the concept of a pope, that Christianity went middle age on their followers. What I find interesting about Jesus taught that if you want to be first, you want to be last. If you want to lead, then you have to be a follower. These are things that Jesus taught his disciples. And so it's almost an upside down structure to the manner in which the world operates, and certainly the manner in which the world operated in first century Roman occupied Judea. It's an upside down pyramid. You want to be the leader, you got to be a follower. If you want to be served, well, then you have to serve. So it turned things upside down. That is not a Roman structure. And when Rome took over the Christian faith, I find what they did is they said, no, 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 we're not going to follow that. We need to give this Christian faith a Roman structure. We need a pope, and then we need the cardinals, and we need the bishops, and then we need, the brother and sisterly orders. Then we'll have the great unwashed. And the great unwashed will serve us because that's the way the Roman world works. And that was not what Jesus taught. And so rather than adopting the Roman Empire to Christian teaching, Rome perverted Christian teaching to make it compatible with Roman ideology, with the Roman worldview. That's my contention. Um, Sharunian believes that Hinduism is a peaceful religion. I don't know about that. The violence that broke out between Hindus and Muslims back in Iran at the end of World War II, when Gandhi was leading India's movement toward independence away from Britain. There was violence between Hindus and Muslims. And that's why eventually, when the British ruled that region, what years back was called Hindustan, land of the Hindus, um, when Britain led, Pakistan and India were all part, that was one big, the Raj. That's what they ruled. And then once they gained their independence, there was friction between Mahatma Gandhi, who was Hindu, and I'm trying to remember, Nehru, I think was the name of the guy, who was Indian, but Islamic. And so eventually what happened is they partitioned what had been the former British Raj, and they created India and Pakistan. India, majority Hindu, Pakistan, majority Muslim. Anyway, but I don't think Hinduism is in any way, there's a tendency to believe that because Hindus practice vegetarianism, veganism, the whole idea of a sacred cow. Anyway, and Danny's writing, Allah is the Muslim God, Abba is our God. Abba is an Arabic word that simply means daddy. Jesus said, I call him Abba. I call him daddy, a familiar word that's more, it speaks of a kinship that goes beyond father is kind of a distant word. Oh, yes, father. I'll do as you say, father. Daddy implies affection. I don't have an issue with the word Allah in the sense that simply the Arabic word can a if someone who speaks Arabic as a first language but is Christian, can they express their love for God in the Arabic language? Well, if they do, they're going to refer when they talk about God the same way a Christian talks. We're both Christians. They're going to use the word Allah, but they're referring to Allah and his only son, Jesus Christ, who went to the cross, died, and on the third day rose again. conquered the grave. And because he took on our sins on that cross, and because he conquered death, we too shall conquer death. And you can speak Arabic and profess that belief and use the word Allah in Arabic. Anyway, um, Eatme is writing, saying good evening to Sharunian. Uh, and then Nancy makes reference to the fact that in India, and it still exists to this day, this idea of the caste system, and this idea that the darker your skin, the lower your rating, the lower your stature in the society is. Lighter skin is venerated, is held in higher regard than darker skin in India. And I know this firsthand. It's not as ingrained as it was previously in terms of almost the legal system, as in, this is your caste. This is you can't go beyond. It's not as ingrained that way, but is still very much in the minds of a lot of Indian people. Uh, anyway, and then Danny's writing, Nancy wrote ABBA, ABBA, and with question marks, and Danny's saying it means father. Uh, and my understanding is that Abba is the Arabic word that means daddy, and that it's more friendly, familial term and less rigid than the word, father. Uh, Danny's writing Surah, which basically they in the Quran, they have chapters and verses the same way that the Bible has chapters and verses, but they refer to the chapters as surahs. And I think that's basically just an Arabic word that means chapter. So Quran chapter or surah 19, verse 33. And in the English translation, Danny has it as peace be upon me, the day I was born, the day I die, and the day I will be raised back to life. Okay. Um, and then Danny goes on to say, if the country's name is not Canada or United States of America, I will not live there. We live in the best two countries on earth, bar none. I can't argue because those are the only two countries I've lived in. I've been to others, but I've only resided in Canada and the US. In Canada, I've had residences in Ontario and Quebec, and in the United States when I was a kid, when my dad got transferred down there when I was 6 months old, we lived in New York, New Jersey, and Oregon. So, and we are two amazing countries, but things are sliding down. We have Bill C9 coming out now, which is on a religious footing because I've got to read more into it, but I have what I consider to be a basic understanding, but I'm not 100% sure I have everything nailed down right. But they're currently, as things stand right now, individuals are allowed to express religious beliefs in this country that some don't like. I express the biblical belief that there are two genders, male and female, and you don't get to pick, and that any sexual activity outside of a consecrated marriage between a man and a woman, that anything outside of that paradigm is a sinful act. Now, some will say that that proclamation, that calling any sexual activity outside of a consecrated marriage between a man and woman, that is hate speech. And likewise, saying that there are only two genders and you don't get to choose your gender on the basis of subjective feeling. It's based on objective biological reality, your XY, your XX. You don't get to pick based on your feelings. Well, some will call that hate speech. And this bill C9 is seeking, as I understand it, to remove an individual's right to religious freedom to proclaim their beliefs based on religion. And they'll say, well, that's hate speech. And it all comes down to incitement of hatred. And Jesus was the, prince of, was and is the Prince of Peace. And again, getting back to the woman caught in adultery, is there no one left to condemn you? Then neither do I condemn you. You know, when Jesus was being taken away, when he was being dragged before the religious authorities, Peter pulled out his sword and cut off one of the guard's ears, and Jesus restored it. He healed the man. We don't have any stories of Jesus killing anyone or any acts of violence. The only thing that could come close, perhaps, is when he overturned the the table, so the money changers, and got out a bullwhip and said, "You will not turn my father's house into a place of trade." But there's nothing in there about him striking anyone or injuring anyone, and certainly not about his unaliving anyone. That's not the case with Muhammad. Uh, at any rate, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, which is something I do. Anyway, uh, and then Danny goes on to write, look up Dr. J. Smith on Islam. He is intense and in depth. I've spoken many times on here about Dr. George Antonios, who has a YouTube channel called Counsel and Might. He's a Baptist pastor in Montreal, but he was born and raised in Lebanon, in Beirut, and he speaks Arabic. And on his channel, you'll find him talking. He'll be reading through the Quran, reading it in Arabic, and then giving the English translation of the Arabic. And so, highly recommend that as well. Uh, I'm just okay. Sharunian thinks that I look Arab with a full beard. I don't know. I'm a little too pasty white to look Arab, but whatever the case. Uh, and then Danny is sharing a link to a video that talks about the full assault on religion, and I'm assuming it has to do with Bill C9. And then Nancy is saying that the Quran is the main book written by Muhammad. Now, again, Muhammad was an illiterate warlord. He would make proclamations, others would write it down. He didn't write it. Um, and then Emi goes on to talk about how the Hadith, again, she's saying that it was a different book that sprang during the very first caliphate. Yeah, it's kind of like an expansion upon the Quran by the religious leaders of that time. Uh, and Nancy goes on to say that the caliph would pay in gold for people who would bring teaching, second-hand account of what Muhammad taught. Okay. Uh, and then Nancy goes on to say, this is why there is a deep divide between the Sunnis versus the Shiites who do not follow any type of hadith. They reject them. Well, my understanding is that the Shia, which are Iran, is a majority Shia country. And the Shia believe that um, Islamic authority rests with those who have a blood relationship to Muhammad, whereas the Sunni maintain that there does not need to be that blood lineage, that you do not have to be a direct descendant of Muhammad, that it's more of a spiritual thing. And so that's the divide between the two, as I understand it. Um, and then Nancy goes on to write that they also go around walking with the picture of the grandson of Muhammad, which they recognize as Muhammad dependents. The Sunnis are and were always caliphate oriented, and they did not. Which and then Danny writes, Allah in Arabic translates to the God. It isn't his name; it is a title. Yeah. the Lord God, creator of all things. Allah, and then creator of all things. You can express the Christian faith in the Arabic language, and there are Arabic speaking Christians in the world. And so when they talk about God in Arabic, and when Jesus says, his only begotten son, John 3:16, God so loved the world. They will, so God so loved the world that the word that they will use speaking in Arabic for God is Allah. Um, Nancy's writing, I hear Costa Rica is a really nice place to settle if you know the language and open some type of business. I've heard that as well. This is in reference, I'm sure, to Danny's remark that he only wants to live in the US or Canada, not anywhere else. The only thing is Costa Rica, Gold Coast is what I think it means in English. Better learn to hablo español, and I know only poquito. Uno, dos, tres, cuatro, cinco, seis, siete, ocho, nueve, diez. Don't get very far just knowing how to count to 10 and order a beer. Cerveza, por favor. Donde está el baño? Where's the bathroom? My Spanish is so rudimentary, I wouldn't be able to get by. However, what's interesting is I was down in Cuba in Holguin in the town square, and there was a guy selling peanuts, and he did not speak English. I do not speak Spanish, but we were able to have a conversation because there are similarities between French and Spanish. So we were able to have a bit of a conversation about Cuban history and about revolution and about the guerre. The word for war in French is guerre, and it's similar, guerra or something in Spanish. And it was interesting. I always enjoy conversations like that. Uh, and Nancy saying, heck, the rest of Central and South America mostly Catholic, and that is true because of the Spanish. And Spain is very Roman Catholic. So, Danny's writing, hate speech is anything they don't like, agree with, or anything that hurts their feelings. Well, the problem is, how do you legislate something? I think it is enormously valuable that Canadians and Americans and other Western nations that we are allowed to express our thoughts, views, and opinions. But what's happened now is some people feel are hurt. An individual who's suffering from gender confusion, who thinks a man who thinks he's a woman and wants the world to accept him as a woman, and will hear someone like me, and I'm not alone. There are tons of individuals like myself proclaiming there are two genders, male, female, you don't get to pick. Well, someone hearing that will be hurt by it, and they'll consider it hateful. And hey, at the end of the day, well, sticks and stones. All right, suck it up, Buttercup. Your feelings are hurt. Too bad. Get over it. But where trouble comes in is where if some other person, not myself, but some other person hears me talking and then uses my words as justification to commit an act of violence again, which is something I would never condone or sanction, or I would denounce it in the strongest possible terms. I would never want anyone to take anything I say and use it as an excuse to commit an act of violence or hatred. But let's say someone did. Let's say someone said, I was listening to Act One, a Canadian take on news events, and that Gordy Canuck, he's right on. Those guys who think they're women are deluded, and commits an act of violence against someone who is gender confused, and then says, well, I was incited to my action by what I heard being said by Gordy Canuck on the Act One podcast on YouTube. And my understanding of Bill C9 is that is the rationale behind why they want to restrict free speech, is because my words, even though I'm repudiating violence in the strongest possible terms, I could still incite someone. That seems to me to be the justification for and they want us all in this hive groupthink, one mind mentality where everyone agrees. The only narrative being allowed to be put forward in the public square is that gender is a societal construct. And what's so curious, what's so interesting, is that there is Islamophobia. So if anyone like my station now, I might be confused with, or I might be accused, not confused, but rather accused of promoting Islamophobia. That Act One, a Canadian take on news events, Gordy Connaught is Islamophobic. And a phobia, in my understanding of that word, it means an irrational and debilitating fear. Someone who is hydrophobic, I think that's the fear of water. It means that, they can't walk along the shore of Lake Ontario because they are irrationally afraid of large bodies of water. Oh my God, I can't operate, I can't function. I'm not, I don't have an irrational fear of Islam. I know Muslims and I have no issue. I talk with Muslims. There's a gentleman in town here who owns or is the agent for a gas station. And I directed him to where there was a mosque in a neighboring town. When I found out, when I heard his name, Muhammad, another local shop owner, another Muhammad. And don't have an irrational fear, but by labeling anyone who criticizes Islam as Islamophobic, it kind of gives Muslims a pass. Gives them a pass. Well, we can't criticize Islam. What about Islamic attitudes towards transgender and homosexuality and all that? Well, if you bring that up, that's Islamophobic. But but Christians, oh, we can go at them because there's no Christianophobia. We don't have that. It's this whole uh, Marxist idea of dominant groups and white Christian males. We've been the dominant group, so it's impossible for us to be persecuted. We are the persecutors. We can never be the persecuted. But Islamic community, Muslims, they're a minority, so they operate under a different set of rules. This world is gone that what crazy. Uh, so let's read on. Uh, and Nancy, with respect to my poquito Spanish, is saying that "Donde está el baño?" That's a very important phrase to learn. It means "Where's the bathroom?" Donde está el baño? Uh, Donde está is just where is whatever. And then Danny's writing, si se hablo español, seulement un poquito. Danny also, poquito means very little or small. Stop writing in Spanish. It's too hard to write. Hablo despacio, por favor. Despacio, por favor is please. Cerveza, por favor. Beer, please. And I like what Danny's written. I agree with him that the Liberal government under Mark Carney and Trudeau before him, that, what, totally crazy. And Nancy's saying one of these things, hablo despacio, it means speak slowly, please, because I need to get out for her, French Spanish vocabulary. For me, I need the English Spanish. And we do live in, things are bad. And they're going to get worse, but you can find peace, joy, comfort by getting into relationship with the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the name to which every knee will bow and every tongue shall confess. He who died, was buried, and on the third day rose again, something that Islam denies. They deny the resurrection. And if you deny the resurrection, Christianity becomes pointless. The most important aspect of the Christian faith is the resurrection, because it is by conquering death that is what puts my broken, fallen, sinful individuals like me and gives me a relationship with a perfect, righteous, and holy God, because Jesus took on my sin and conquered death. And because he conquered death, I too will conquer death. Islam teaches this idea of it's the scales. It's, well, I did a bunch of bad stuff, but then I balanced it off with some good stuff. And as long as my good stuff is higher than my bad stuff, then I get to go into paradise. Yeah, a Muslim, I've heard, if he's been sinful, will what mosque you go to? Well, when I've had a bad week and I've been sinful, I go to the further mosque, the Al-Aqsa mosque. Al-Aqsa just means the furthest. I go to the one farther away, because then I'm taking more steps. And each one of these steps toward that further mosque counts as good points in my favor to make up for the crappy things that I did. Anyway, uh, and Danny's writing, what's great about Gen X, you can't offend us. We were raised by Murphy, Carlin, Kinnison, Clays, going through all the names that you went through yesterday. And Leary, Dennis Leary. I don't think I mentioned that one yesterday, or I don't think you did, or if you did, I didn't talk much about it. Dennis Leary is hilarious. But yes, Jesus is king. So I'm going to wrap up the podcast. If you made it all the way through an hour and 20 plus minutes and you're not subscribed, I would ask you to please do so. Uh, it's a crowded space in the YouTube world. And when you go counter narrative, when you do not promote the messaging that the tech giants and the World Economic Forum types and our government types want projected, your voice gets suppressed. And those of us professing, especially a miserable, pathetic little voice like my own, a miserable, pathetic little station, no professional lighting, very bare bones basic. It's tough to grow. Uh, because if all I was interested in was growing the channel, then all I would have to do is sell out and say, make my name Gordina Canuck and proclaim myself to be a woman, and go from the river to the sea, you know, and be a queer for Palestine, like a chickens for KFC. Anyway, at the end of the day, take this blessing that I end all my videos with and let it sink into your heart. May the Lord God, creator of all things, may he bless and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you, and may he grant you peace. Peace in our day. And you can find that peace even in a world gone crazy, even when the storms are all around us, even when you're walking on the waves and you feel like you're going to drown. Jesus is there to lift you up and to show you how to walk in faith and to know that this life is not the end. That, yeah, we are born to trouble, we are born to strife. There is going to be storms raging, but that doesn't mean you can't find peace, joy, and comfort. And the way you can do that is by getting into a relationship with the Son, not a son, but the Son. So whale oil has come on just in the last bit. Uh, he's saying hi and good night all at the same time. And anyway, he was hoping to hear my 12-year-old, but as I said earlier, I thought about that, and on reflection, I decided I don't think it's appropriate. I think he's too young. He's going to get sucked into the social media sphere soon enough. Yeah, I think you get the idea. Anyway, God bless. So, Whale, even though you showed up late, thank you, Danny, Nancy, Sharunian, and anyone I missed. Appreciate it. And if you made it to the end and you missed the live chat, put your thoughts in the comments below. Am I Islamophobic? What do you think? I'll leave that as an open question. Put your thoughts down below and hope to see you back when I do my next live stream. God bless. Take care.